I have the pleasure of introducing Michelle this morning to everybody. I know a lot of you know Michelle. A lot of you have not met Michelle before, and we are really, really excited and thankful for the new faces that we're seeing today, for the new connections that we have. Like Jocelyn said, it is humbling and it is overwhelming. So thank you for taking time out of your Saturday, whether it is 7:30 in the morning for you or 5:30 in the evening for you. We thank you for being here today. So Michelle Jay Goff lives in Searcy, Arkansas, and serves as the founder and director of Iron Rose Sister Ministries, equipping women to connect to God and to one another more deeply in English, Spanish, and bilingual contexts across the Americas. And like she said, right now we're adding Portuguese into all of that too. As an international author and speaker, Michelle likes to say that her nerdy passion is Spanish, but her first passion is God. Michelle has been working for the Lord full-time for more than 20 years in various contexts: missions in Venezuela and Colombia, campus ministry, establishing new congregations in the United States and Latin America, and of course, in women's ministry. Michelle loves meeting women where they are at and walking with them one step closer to God. Her training in this began as the oldest of 4 daughters. She and the second sister were baptized on the same day in March of 1991 by their father. Michelle enjoys cooking, reading, writing, spending time with her family, having coffee with a friend, and traveling. For more information about her, Iron Rose Sister Ministries, or the 6 books that she has written and any other ministry resources that we have available, please visit ironrosesister.com. So thank you, Michelle, for being here this morning. We're really excited about today, where we're kind of kicking off our theme for the new year. And I know this is something that has been covered in a lot of prayer and a lot of guidance and a lot of encouragement from others. So thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Amanda. And there are a couple of ladies that hay algunas que están buscando su sala en español y no se preocupen, les estamos ayudando así. Crystal está pendiente. There are a couple of ladies that are still trying to figure out how to get over to the Spanish groups. So I was greeting them and giving them some of the information. I am so excited, like Amanda said, about where God has led us and what he is doing to guide us and to bring us into the big picture story of what the Bible is. One of the things that was very exciting last year was one of the studies that I was in. We were looking at the Bible as one big story, because a lot of times we hear, or we even have taught some of the children's class stories, and we know the story of Noah, or we know the story of Abraham, or we know the story of this one or that one, but we don't always remember the order or where they connect with the other stories. Or wait, who came first, Abraham or Moses? Wait, no, okay, I know Abraham came first, but then was Moses, okay, so that, and we get, so looking at the Bible as that one big picture story and seeing this as a love story. This is a love story that God has written and has orchestrated and has facilitated for each and every one of us. And the way in which we connect with him and with others many times, and the best ways, is through story. So my nephew and niece, I speak to them in only Spanish, and I was greeting them earlier this week. They were in the car, so my sister called and said, okay, hey, if you have a minute, we'll FaceTime with you. I was getting over COVID, and they were waiting to pick up their dad from work, and they are 9 and 6 years old. And so I was chatting with them, and I said, hey, I need your help. I'm going to be talking with the ladies this Saturday about stories. What children's story, what books that I read you all the time should I share with those ladies? Well, what I loved was that their first answer was one of the books that I have in only Spanish. Proud aunt moment right there. But I said, oh, but I'm going to be speaking to ladies in English and Spanish. So is there one of the other books? Because that one's a little bit harder to translate. And so my niece, who is 6, she said, oh, the trees story. The trees story. And I said, that's a great example. Well, part of why it's such a great example, I don't know if you know the story of the 3 trees, but it is it's not just a children's book. It's actually a known folklore, a traditional folklore tale. And there's not even a known attributed author because it has been told by so many for so many years in so many languages, in so many different cultures, because we connect with stories. We remember stories. And this story of the 3 trees, to tell it in its quickest, most simple form, is that there were 3 trees that each had a dream. The first tree wanted to be a boat that would sail people all over the place. The second tree wanted to hold treasure. And the third tree wanted to be there and point other people to God. Well, the woodcutters come in and they chop down the tree, and the tree that dreamt of holding treasure ended up being put in a stable, but it was a manger and ended up holding the greatest treasure, baby Jesus. The tree that dreamt of being a boat that would be this huge, like almost like a cruise ship boat, ended up going out on the Sea of Galilee and holding Jesus so that he could better teach the people from the boat than he would have been able to just from the shore. And the third tree that just wanted to be there and point to Jesus, the woodcutter said, any old tree will do for me, but it ended up being part of the tree that was built into the cross. That, of course, definitely points people to God. And so we remember and we connect with the stories of this. Now, we can suppose that it was not 3 trees standing right next to each other that expressed their dreams that ended up being in the manger and the boat and the cross, but we can kind of get into another facet of the story by looking at something like the 3 trees. One of the other books that I love to read bilingually is it's a children's book by Max Lucado, and it's the Hermy and Wormy series. He has all kinds of stories that talk about these worms. And no, none of us are necessarily worms. We feel like worms sometimes that are waiting that impatient process of becoming the butterflies and the transformation that God brings about. And I mention these as children's stories and as children's books. And I mention about how we teach some of these stories in children's classes because there is something that is so true, no matter our age, about story and how we connect with story. I held up these books, or I started telling these stories, and I wish you could all see each other's faces because you all like got this little delight and twinkle in your eyes, and you sat up straighter and like, oh, she's going to read us a story. This is story time. This is awesome. That's the point. We all, no matter our age, connect with and get excited about stories. One of the things that Amanda was sharing in the description of who I am and what I love to do, one of my favorite things to do is to sit with somebody with a cup of coffee, tea, whatever it is. We sit there and we swap God stories. And when I say God stories, what I mean are stories that are lived out today, but that give God the glory, that recognize his hand at work, that recognize that we serve a living and active God. And sometimes in very tangible ways, those stories that we're living out right now connect to some of the Bible stories that bring a verse to mind or bring a song to mind, or we go, wow, in the exact same way that Abraham was tested for his faith. No, God may not be calling me to literally sacrifice my son like God did in Genesis 22. But turn with me to Genesis 22 for a second. I'm going to use this story to illustrate one of our points. while you're turning there, I'm going to start reading a few parts of the story in Genesis 22. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and saddled his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship and then we will come back to you. Okay, the story continues. We could read this story and kind of listen to it and think about retelling it from Abraham's perspective. Or we could listen to it and think about retelling it from Isaac's perspective. Okay, yeah, I've gone and sacrificed to God with my dad before, because, he tells me about God and how I was an answer to prayer. They prayed to God for me, I'm that son. Yeah, have you heard how old mom is? I mean, we can kind of get into Isaac's version of the story, or we could get into the servants telling of the story, or as we hear some of the things that God specifically said to Abraham, we could read it and listen to it through that lens and through that perspective of God's telling of the story. Well, as you read on through it, the way in which sometimes we connect more with certain characters or with certain facets of the story is part of the power of the living word as that story that has been written on our hearts, as we read this morning in 2 Corinthians. These stories are powerful. And because we can read them with those different lenses of understanding based on our own circumstances, they are relevant to all of us and across all time. We actually, as a family, last night, we were discussing about, we didn't get into the particulars of carbon dating, but just talking about, and not an old earth, new earth type debate, but just, how long ago exactly was Abraham on earth? Or we know more specifically how long ago Jesus was here on earth. Okay, but how relevant these stories are universally and timelessly, in some ways, it doesn't matter how long ago it was, because it is still true today. But what is more important for us is to remember those stories. One of the things that God emphasized over and over and over with the Israelites was remember. We see that in the 10 Commandments. We see that all across the Old Testament. We see the prophets calling the people of God to remember. Do you not remember what God did? Let's look at one of the times, and specifically the way in which God asked them to remember through what the Jews knew as the Shema. The Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God. It's in Deuteronomy chapter 6. If you turn over to Deuteronomy chapter 6 with me. And as you're turning there, the word in Hebrew for remember is zakar. Z-A-K-H-A-R is how it's transliterated into the English. And as part of the understanding the Jews had for the word remember was that we remember, yes, it's a part of looking back, because you can't remember something that will happen in the future. But when you remember something, you are remembering it in order to know how to move forward. Remembering is not just about a looking back, but if you remember well, then you know how to proceed, how to move forward, how to go from there. And that was the kind of remembering that God called his people, the Israelites, to, and the kind of remembering that he invites us into as well. Whether Jews of the Bible times or especially Messianic Jews today, they still have a weekly portion of the Torah that they read and discuss. And the whole purpose of that, the whole purpose of why we get together and we gather on Sunday mornings and we break the bread and we drink the cup is to remember. And there are certain rhythms that, for example, I love the story of Esther, not just because it's this woman hero of the Bible, but because also it's like this classic story that annually the Jews would even reenact. You've got your classic villain with Haman, you've got your heroine with Esther, you've got your supportive family with Mordecai, you've got the king, and even children would act it out, or they would do little like puppet type shows to retell the story because of what it helped them to remember. Well, okay, Deuteronomy chapter 6. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. I'm in verse 4. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. I read Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 through 9 there. When we make those stories a part of our everyday life, a part of our everyday remembering, a part of our natural rhythms, then they help us to remember looking back, but they help us to know how to move forward. But what is the why? What is it that we need to remember in order to know how to move forward? So let's read verses 20 through 25 to get a little bit of a glimpse of that why. In the future, when your son asks you, what is the meaning of the stipulations, decrees, and laws the Lord our God has commanded you? In other words, why do we have all of this stuff on our doorposts? Why do you keep telling me these stories over and over again? Why do we keep, I've already read that verse. I have it memorized. Why are we, yes, you're all grinning at me, understanding all of the questions that come with that. Tell him, okay, so here it is. We were slaves of Pharaoh in Egypt, but the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. Before our eyes, the Lord sent miraculous signs and wonders, great and terrible, upon Egypt and Pharaoh and his whole household. But he brought us out from there to bring us in and give us the land that he promised on oath to our forefathers. The Lord commanded us to obey all these decrees and to fear the Lord our God, so that we might always prosper and be kept alive, as is the case today. And if we are careful to obey all this law before the Lord our God, as he has commanded us, that will be our righteousness. Now, I have a question that I actually want you to answer interactively. Why did God want them to remember his bringing them out of Egypt? What was it about the bringing them out of Egypt and the story that God wanted them to remember there? What is it about that God wanted them to remember, to bring to mind, to remember so that they would know how to move forward? Debbie.
I think it's one of the things is that they were slaves, they were oppressed, they were leaving a terrible, whatever, environment.
Okay, Crystal?
They were completely dependent on him. It's easy to think once they have their own kingdom that they don't need him anymore.
Both good answers. Any others?
He was their source that they needed to go to for any situation. It was pretty bad to be slaves, but whether it's slaves or whether they need their daily bread or whatever it was, he was their source, and they needed to remember that he's the one to go to and not any of these other nations.
So dependence on him, provider, Michaela, and then Amanda, and then Karen.
They can be sure if they were rescued from that situation in Egypt, that God could do anything else with them in the future.
Yes, his power, his ability to do all of what he did, he still has that. Amanda.
I think his, the reminder that he sees them. He saw them when they, you know, exactly like how Debbie said, they were in an environment where they were oppressed. They were most definitely the lowest of the low. Those around them didn't see them as people, as humans, but God did. And I think, you know, a reminder that he sees us, who we are, how we are, always in whatever situation we're in, and he remembers us. So we remember him because he thinks of and sees and remembers us.
Okay, Karen and Kayla, I see your hands and I want to hear your answers, but we also only have 2 more minutes before the Spanish are coming back. Now, here's the beautiful thing about what each and every one of you did answer out loud and what some of you had on your mind that you wanted to mention. All of those are true. God wants us to remember all of those things and more, because that is who he is. All of those things are true, but sometimes I need to remember his provision. Sometimes I need to remember his power over, you know, in each of the 10 plagues, he showed how he was way more powerful than any of the little g gods that the Egyptians and others thought were really cool. He put them in their place. There were so many things about that God wanted the Israelites to remember. And he said, please remember, because this is who I am. And when you remember these things, woo, we're like supercharged to go on and to keep trusting him, to keep knowing that he sees us, to keep knowing that he'll provide, to keep knowing that he is God, Yahweh, the I am, that's all of these amazing things. And so this year, part of what we are doing is we are remembering those God stories from the Bible and from our own lives. And so we want to invite you to tell and to retell those stories. We're doing it through our blog on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We're doing it through various other things on our website. We're sharing stories. And what that does is it invites others into their own stories with God. Because nobody can argue with a story. They can argue with different theological points and doctrinal blah, 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 blah. But let's get back to the heart of the best story, the best love story that all points back to Christ. And so that's why and I'm going to share this as a way of even inviting our Spanish speaking sisters that are coming back in to see it. These God stories, these his stories, they're all his stories. He's the author. We just get to be characters in his story. And when we remember those truths from his stories and retell them and share them, aren't you all just like, okay, let's go. God's got this. So ladies, especially those that didn't get to share some of their answers, you'll be able to do that in your small groups, and then we'll all come back together. And I'm going to share some of these same truths now with our Spanish speaking sisters. So thank you so much. Hermanas habla hispanas, bienvenidas. Ya vamos a despedir a las habla inglesas. So English speaking sisters, you can be clicking down at the bottom for the breakout groups. And Amanda, you can stop the recording for English.